Omotara threw the contract across the table before Folarin could finish his sentence. "Sign it," she said. "Sign it tonight or we lose the entire quarter." Folarin blinked at her. The lamp above the dining table cast gold light across the papers, across Titilayo's crayon drawings still scattered from earlier, across the half-eaten plate of rice Omotara had not touched since she discovered the supplier's email at 9 o'clock. It was past midnight. Their daughter was asleep, and the man sitting across from her, the man she had chosen, the man she had believed in when nobody else did, was looking at the contract like he had never seen one before. "I didn't know it was this serious," Folarin said. Omotara sat down slowly. She looked at her husband, not with anger, with something quieter and far more dangerous. The look of a woman who has just realized she is carrying something alone that was always meant to be shared. Omotara Adeyemi was not the kind of woman who announced herself. She was the kind of woman who arrived, assessed, and handled things before anyone else noticed there was a problem. She grew up the third daughter of a schoolteacher father in Ibadan, which meant she understood early that love was not a feeling as much as it was a decision you made every morning before your feet hit the floor. She met Folarin Coker in 2015 at a cousin's engagement party in Bodija. He was the one laughing the loudest, dancing without rhythm, completely unbothered by how ridiculous he looked. Something about his unguarded joy broke something open in her chest. She crossed the room. She introduced herself first. She already knew, even then, that she would have to be the one to move toward him, because Folarin Coker was the kind of man who waited at the edge of good things, hoping they would come to him. They married in 2017. Modest ceremony, white canopy, plastic chairs, a band that played 3 songs on repeat. Her uncle Babatunde sat in the front row with an expression that said he was reserving his full judgment for later. Folarin's family arrived in matching asoebi and celebrated like the wedding was already a success. Omotara danced with her husband and decided that was enough. What nobody at that wedding knew was that Folarin's electrical supplies business was surviving on fumes. 2 staff, a rented shop in Surulere so small that both men had to stand sideways to pass each other. A supplier debt of 60,000 naira that Folarin had been quietly rotating for months. He had told Omotara about the debt on their 3rd date, and she had not flinched. She simply asked him to show her the books. That was the moment Folarin fell completely in love with her. She spent 3 nights restructuring his account on a notepad. She identified where money was leaking. She renegotiated a payment plan with the supplier herself, calling the man on a Sunday morning with a calm authority that made Folarin stand in the doorway of the kitchen and just watch her in quiet astonishment. "You didn't have to do that," he told her afterwards. She said, "I know," and went back to cooking. Their daughter, Titilayo, arrived in 2018. Small, loud, already full of opinions. The house changed, not just because of the baby, but because something in Folarin shifted too. A softness came over him in those early months of parenthood, a humility that made Omotara feel for the first time that they were building something real. And they were, just not in the way Folarin understood. In early 2018, Omotara attended a family lunch at her uncle Babatunde's house in Magodo. Babatunde was a project manager at Crestview Infrastructure, a mid-sized property development firm that had just won 3 government-linked contracts and was actively sourcing suppliers. During the meal, while Folarin was home with Titilayo, Omotara mentioned her husband's business. Quietly, precisely, she knew exactly what she was doing. "He supplies electrical components," Babatunde said. "Quality ones," Omotara said. "He's reliable. He just needs one serious client to prove it." Babatunde looked at his niece for a long moment, the way a man looks when he recognizes that the person across from him is sharper than the room. He picked up his phone during dessert and sent a single message. 3 weeks later, Crestview Infrastructure called Folarin's shop directly. The contract was worth 4 million naira in the first phase alone. Folarin came home that evening shaking. He lifted Omotara off the floor and spun her in the small living room, knocking a plant off the windowsill, laughing like a boy. "We did it," he kept saying. "We did it, Tara." She hugged him back and smiled into his shoulder and said nothing about the lunch, nothing about Babatunde, nothing about the quiet conversation she had over pepper soup that changed the entire direction of their lives. She just let him have the joy of it. That was her first mistake, not because she was wrong to support him, but because she let him believe the miracle had arrived on its own. Over the next year, Folarin's business expanded in ways he had never imagined. 5 staff became 7. The Surulere shop got a signboard. He bought a Toyota Hilux, cash, and drove it home on a Friday afternoon with his chest so full of pride it could have burst. He stood beside the truck in the compound, arms folded, and said, "This is just the beginning, Tara. This is just the beginning." Omotara was managing his suppliers' relationships from her phone. She was reconciling accounts every Sunday morning before church. She was keeping Titilayo fed, dressed, schooled, and loved. And she was doing it all without making a sound, because she had learnt, as many women learn, that the loudest person in the room gets the credit whether they earned it or not. She was not loud, she was the wall. And walls do not announce themselves, they simply hold everything up. Do not go anywhere. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching this from. This story is only getting started and you do not want to miss what happens next. The first time Omotara noticed something had shifted in Folarin was not lipstick on a collar. It was not a phone turned face down on the table. It was the way he said her name. They were at a dinner gathering in Victoria Island, one of those parties that smelled like new money and old pretension, where the women laughed too carefully and the men talked too loudly about things they had only half accomplished. Folarin had dressed carefully that evening. Emerald green dress, gold earrings, her hair pinned up the way Folarin once told her made him lose his train of thought. She was standing near the window talking to another woman when Folarin called her from across the room. Omotara, not Tara, not the nickname that had been there since the 3rd month of dating when he whispered it against her temple in the dark. Just her full name, flat, functional, like he was calling the name of a piece of furniture he needed moved. She turned, she smiled, she crossed the room to him, but something inside her went very still. She did not say anything that night. She filed it away in the quiet part of herself where she kept all the things she noticed but was not yet ready to name. On the drive home, Folarin talked about Dayo's investment portfolio and the new contract he was hoping to pursue. Omotara watched the Lagos night slide past the window and held Titilayo's sleeping head in her lap and breathed slowly and said, "That sounds good, Folarin. That sounds good." Not his name with warmth, just words to fill the space where real conversation used to live. By October 2019, the distance between them had become architectural. They lived in the same house but occupied different versions of it. Folarin came home late and left early. He smelled different, a cologne she had not bought him. He stopped asking how her day was, and because she had always been the one who held things together without being asked, she kept holding things together without being asked. She kept managing his supplier accounts. She kept answering emails from Crestview's procurement team when Folarin was unreachable. She kept Titilayo's world warm and steady as her own grew cold. There was a woman. Omotara knew before she knew. A woman always knows. Her name was Bisola. Younger, louder, the kind of beautiful that demanded to be looked at. She had attached herself to Folarin's new social circle like something decorative and intentional. Omotara saw her once at a function laughing at something Folarin said, touching his arm in that particular way that has no innocent explanation. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Bisola did not look away. Neither did Omotara. That night, after Titilayo was asleep, Omotara went to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a long time with the tap running and her hands flat on the counter. She was not crying. She was deciding. She was asking herself the question every woman eventually faces. Do I fight for this man, or do I let him go and fight for myself? She prayed. She always prayed when the ground beneath her felt uncertain. She prayed quietly and fiercely, the way her mother had taught her, with her eyes open and her hands steady. She did not get a dramatic answer. She got something quieter, a deep, bone-level knowing that whatever Folarin was about to do, she would survive it. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She went to bed. February 2020 arrived the way disasters often do, on an ordinary evening, with food on the stove and a child in the next room and no warning at all. Omotara was making a foriro. The kitchen smelled of locust beans and palm oil and the particular domestic warmth that she had built with her own 2 hands over 3 years. Titilayo was in the living room watching cartoons. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it always was. Folarin walked in, still wearing his jacket. He did not sit down. He did not look at the food. He stood in the middle of the kitchen with his hands in his pockets and said, "Tara, I think we should separate." The spoon kept moving in the pot. She did not stop staring. She said, "Okay." Folarin blinked. He had clearly prepared for tears, for shouting, for the kind of scene that would let him cast himself as the reasonable one. Her stillness disarmed him completely. I feel like we've grown apart. I heard you, Folarin." She turned the flame down. She turned around and looked at him with eyes so calm it frightened him. "I heard you the first time." He moved out 3 weeks later. He took his clothes, his laptop, his Toyota Hilux, and the life that Omotara had quietly built around him like scaffolding around a building that couldn't stand on its own. What came next was the particular cruelty of social collapse. The women who had eaten at Omotara's table, who had praised her cooking and borrowed her recipes and called her every Sunday, they disappeared. Not dramatically, just gradually, the way daylight leaves, so slowly you almost don't notice until it is fully dark and you are standing alone in it. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. The couples that were their friends became simply Folarin's friends because in Lagos, loyalty follows access to money, and the money had left with Folarin. Omotara packed her pride carefully, the way you pack something fragile, and she kept moving. She took a bookkeeping contract with a small trading company in Ikeja, then another. She structured her days around Titilayo: school drop-off, work, school pick-up, dinner, homework, prayers, sleep. A routine so tight and disciplined it left no room for falling apart. She was not happy, but she was standing, and for now, standing was enough. What she did not know was that on the other side of Lagos, the structure that she had quietly maintained for 3 years was already beginning to collapse. The Crestview contract came up for renewal in March 2020. The procurement officer sent 3 emails to Folarin's business address before giving up. Folarin had changed his business email without updating his client contacts, an disorganization that Omotara would never have allowed. Uncle Babatunde, who quietly monitored the account relationship since he facilitated it, made one call to Omotara's number, not Folarin's, and when she did not answer on behalf of the business anymore, he understood everything he needed to understand. Crestview moved on. Within 4 months, Folarin's business shed staff like a tree in Harmattan. 7 became 4, 4 became 2. The shop in Surulere was given up for a smaller space in Naya. Suppliers who had extended credit on the strength of Crestview's name began calling in debts. The Toyota Hilux, the one that Folarin had stood beside in the compound with his chest full of pride, was sold quietly to cover what he owed. And Bisola, who arrived when the money was abundant, left when it became scarce. She did not make a scene. She simply stopped returning his calls with the same urgency, then stopped returning them at all. Folarin found himself alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Naya, staring at a business that had been reduced to rubble, wondering how everything had come apart so fast. He did not understand that he had not built anything. He had lived inside something Omotara built, and when she left, the building came down. June 2020. Titilayo developed a fever that would not break. 3 days of high temperature that frightened Omotara in a way nothing else had since the separation. Not the loneliness, not the money stress, not the silence of a house that used to have 2 adults in it. She wrapped her daughter in a blanket at 11 a.m. that night and took a taxi to the nearest government hospital because that was what was accessible, and Omotara had long since learned to work with what was accessible rather than grieve what wasn't. The hospital was crowded and understaffed and smelled of disinfectant and waiting. She sat on a bench with Titilayo against her chest, smoothing her daughter's hair, whispering the same words her mother used to whisper to her. "You are strong. You are mine. You are going to be fine." A doctor appeared at the end of the corridor. He was moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been on shift too long but was not going to show it. He stopped at the door. He looked at his clipboard. Then he looked up, and Omotara's breath left her body. Dr. Adewale Ogundimu, her first love, University of Ibadan, 2009, 2 years of something so tender and complete that she had spent a decade trying to find its equal in other men for settling, she now understood, for a man who could approximate it. He saw her exactly the same moment. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then Titilayo coughed, and the spell broke, and Adewale crossed the corridor in 6 steps and crouched down in front of them and said in the voice of a doctor, "Let me look at her." But his eyes for just a moment had said something else entirely. If you have been watching since the beginning, now is the time to like this video and subscribe, because what Dr. Adewale does next is going to change everything for Omotara, and you will not want to watch it alone. Adewale walked on Titilayo with the focused calm of a man who had learned to keep his hands steady even when his chest was not. He examined her temperature, checked her throat, listened to her breathing with a stethoscope he pressed gently against her small back while she whimpered, and Omotara held her hand and murmured softly into her hair. He wrote a prescription without rushing. He explained everything clearly. Viral infection, nothing bacterial, fluids and rest, and the medication would handle the rest within 48 hours. "She will be fine," he said, straightening up. He looked at Omotara directly when he said it, not at the clipboard, at her. "Thank you," Omotara said. "You don't have to thank me." A pause. "You never had to thank me for anything, Tara." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her chest cracked open like a window that had been painted shut for years. She pressed her lips together and nodded and looked back at Titilayo because that was safer and because she was not yet ready to feel the full weight of being seen by someone who actually knew how to look. He called her the next morning. She almost did not pick up. She sat watching her phone ring with her heart doing something embarrassing in her rib cage, and then she picked up because she was 32 years old and had survived a failed marriage alone, and she refused to be undone by a phone call. "How is she?" Adewale asked. "Better. The fever broke around 4 this morning." "Good, I'm glad." A silence, easy rather than awkward. "And you? How are you?" Omotara laughed, short and involuntary, the laugh of someone who has not been asked that question sincerely in so long that the sound of it catches her off guard. "I am standing," she said. "I know you are," he said. You were always the one who stayed standing. He did not push. He did not arrive at her door the next day with declarations or demands. He was not that kind of man, which was, she was beginning to remember, precisely what she had loved about him a decade ago. He sent a message 2 days later asking if Titilayo liked Puff Puff because he had passed a woman selling them near the hospital and thought of the child for some reason. Omotara smiled at her phone for longer than she intended to admit. He came by that Saturday morning. He brought Puff Puff in a paper bag and a small juice box, and he sat on the floor of the living room with Titilayo and watched 15 minutes of her cartoon without complaint. Titilayo, who was suspicious of most adults, decided within 12 minutes that she approved of him. She climbed into his lap without asking, and he simply adjusted and kept watching the television as though small children had always been part of his Saturday routine. Omotara watched from the kitchen doorway with a dishcloth in her hands and felt something she had not felt in years, the particular piece of a house that has the right energy in it. It was around this time that Folarin appeared. He had heard through the collapsing network of mutual contacts that Adewale was back in Omotara's life. Not the full story, just enough to ignite the particular panic of a man who has discarded something and suddenly noticed someone else bending to pick it up. He called first. She answered once out of fairness. "I made a mistake, Tara." His voice had lost the smoothness she remembered. It sounded worn, like fabric washed too many times. "I know I did. I've been thinking about everything, and I miss my family. I miss you." Omotara sat with that for a moment, not because she was tempted, but because she was honest enough to herself to let the words land before she responded, to make sure her answer came from clarity and not from the reflexive anger she had every right to carry. "Folarin," she said quietly, "what exactly do you miss?" Silence. "Because if you miss the woman who managed your books and kept your suppliers happy and called in favors on your behalf without telling you, that woman was always working. She was never resting. She does not miss that life." Another pause. "And if you miss your daughter, you know where the courts are. I will never keep Titilayo from her father, but I am not a door you can walk back through when the weather changes." Folarin said her name once more. She waited. Then she said gently but without any room for negotiation, "Take care of yourself." She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the silence of her kitchen. Then she exhaled, long and slow and complete, the way you exhale when you finally put down something heavy you have been carrying for so long you forgot it had weight. He came to the house 2 weeks later. She opened the door and stood in the frame and looked at him. He was thinner. The confidence had gone out of him the way air goes out of something punctured, not all at once but persistently, until the shape of him was different. He looked at her with eyes that were genuinely sorry, and she believed that he was. Genuine sorrow, she had learned, was not the same as earned forgiveness. "Folarin," she said. Her voice was not cold. It was clear, which was different and somehow harder to argue with. "Folarin, you didn't leave me because I failed you. You left because you didn't know what you had, and I can't teach a grown man how to see." She let that land. Then, softer. "I hope you find your way. I really do. But my way is no longer in the same direction as yours." She closed the door, softly. No slam, no drama, because she was not angry anymore. Anger required ongoing investment in someone, and she had divested from Folarin completely. She walked back to the living room where Titilayo was drawing, bold, chaotic crayon strokes that looked like celebrations. She sat beside her daughter and picked up a yellow crayon and colored in the sky of whatever it was Titilayo was making. "Mommy, what color is the sun?" Titilayo asked. "Whatever color you want it to be," Omotara said. Titilayo chose orange. Of course she did. Adewale proposed on a Tuesday evening in December 2021. Not in a restaurant, not with an audience, because he understood Omotara well enough that the performance of a thing was never what moved her. He came to her apartment after his shift still in his work clothes, carrying a small container of the jollof rice from the canteen she had once told him was surprisingly decent. He set it on the counter. He turned around. He reached into the pocket of his scrubs and placed a ring on the kitchen table between them. Simple, gold, clean. I have loved you since 2009. I was too young to know what to do with it then. I am not too young anymore. He looked at her steadily. You do not have to carry anything alone ever again. Not because you cannot, I know you can, but because you should not have to, not with me. Omotara looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him, this man who had sat on her living room floor for 15 minutes of cartoons without complaint, who had texted about Puff Puff, who had seen her at her most exhausted in a government hospital corridor and not look away. This man who had never once made her feel like a burden or a background character in her own story. Odewale, she said, yes, if you ever stop seeing me, I won't. Let me finish, a small smile. If you ever stop seeing me, I will not be quiet about it. He laughed, warm and real and from somewhere deep. Good, he said. I don't want quiet, I want you, exactly as you are. She picked up the ring, she placed it in his hand. She held out her finger. He slid it on slowly, carefully, like something irreversible. He wanted to remember the weight of it. Then he pulled her into him and kissed her, not the tentative case of someone still asking for permission, but the full, unhurried case of a man who has arrived somewhere he intends to stay. She held the front of his scrubs in both fists and kissed him back with everything she had spent years not giving to the wrong person. And for the first time in longer than she could name, she felt the particular relief of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Titilayo appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, assessed the situation with the brutal accuracy of a 4-year-old, and announced, "Are you two getting married?" They broke apart. Adewale looked at Omotara. Omotara pressed her lips together to contain the laugh. "Yes," Adewale said to Titilayo very seriously, "if that is acceptable to you." Titilayo considered this with the gravity it deserved. "Then, will you still bring Puff Puff?" "Every Saturday," he said. "Okay," she said, and walked back to her room. They married in March 2022. Ibadan. Outdoor ceremony under a wide sky the color of the inside of a mango, gold and amber and unreasonably beautiful. Omotara wore ivory and gold asolke that her mother had chosen with tears already forming in her eyes before the seamstress finished pinning it. Adewale wore white agbada with gold embroidery at the collar, and he stood at the end of the aisle with his hands clasped in front of him and watched his bride walk toward him with the expression of a man who cannot believe his luck and is not trying to hide it. Uncle Babatunde sat in the front row. He wept openly and did not apologize for it. Titilayo scattered petals with the aggressive enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting her whole short life for this exact assignment. She ran out of petals halfway down the aisle and simply kept walking with her empty basket, fully committed. When Adewale took Omotara's hands at the altar, he leaned close and said quietly, just for her, "You held everything up for so long. Let me hold some of it now." She squeezed his hands. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Omotara never announced what she had done for Folarin. She never told anyone about the lunch with Babatunde, about the supplier calls, about the Sunday morning's reconciling accounts while the rest of Lagos slept. She did not need the story to be known to know that it was true. She had been the wall. Walls do not need applause. They need the right architecture around them, the right structure that recognizes what they are and builds accordingly. Adewale was that structure. And together they built something neither of them had to hold up alone. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from right now? Are you watching from Lagos, London, Houston, Johannesburg, Toronto? Let us know. And if you know a woman who has been the wall